Hello and welcome to another video lecture from MrWatkins.com. I'm Mr. Watkins. This particular video is for the anatomy class and it is on the basic structure of a neuron. If you haven't read the textbook, you might want to do that before you watch this video. You don't necessarily have to. It just might make some things a little easier. I'm just going to go through the basic structure of a neuron. And please forgive my drawing, but I'm going to try and draw this thing out for you, and hopefully it will make sense once we're done at the end. Again, you've got pictures in your textbook as well, and you should be able to follow along with that picture in your textbook as I go through this. Okay, a neuron really has roughly four basic pieces to it. Now there's some other pieces here and we're going to talk about all those pieces, but there's really four basic pieces to it. A neuron's going to have a cell body. This is where the nucleus is. This is where that piece that you would normally associate, hey, that's a cell, that's what it kind of looks like. And then off of this cell body is where a very special process, now a process is going to be basically anything that comes off or protrudes. And when you talked about, or when we went through some bones, you talked about a process as an attachment site for those muscle tissues. And in this case, we're not really looking at an attachment site, but we are looking for something that sticks off of that. And that process, that piece that sticks off, is called an axon. And I want you to think of the axon as something like the wire, if you will, that does the connection. And at the end of the axon, you have the axon kind of divides up, and you get these little areas that are called synapses. Okay, so here's our axon, and then at the end you get it, and it may branch out, but you get these little things called a synapse. And here's where neurotransmitters are used to communicate to that whatever it's trying to affect, whether it's trying to affect the dendrites on another neuron, whether it's trying to affect a muscle tissue. That's just basically the back end here on the bottom end on here, and we'll talk more about what these neurotissues are and how this works in a different video and in class. So again, this is the cell body, and this cell body, this is where the nucleus is. There's endoplasmic reticulum in here. There is mitochondria in here. It's a typical eukaryotic cell. Now attached to this side, or to the cell body, are other protuberances, other processes, things that come off, and they almost look like branches on a tree or an arbor or a bush. And the word dendri actually means branch, and these are called the dendrites. Now the dendrites, this is what picks up your signal. So if you had, say, a sensory receptor and it picked up a signal, say for heat, and something you touched was hot, that sensory, the heat sensor would pick that up, send that signal, and that signal would be picked up by the dendrites. It would go through the cell body and then down the axon to wherever it was going to cause an effect. That's really the four major parts of a neuron. Now there's other things that you need to know, and these things are important because they all are involved with this conduction piece, because remember, your neurons are conductors. This spot right here is called the axon hillock. It's the beginning piece where an action potential, the signal, is going to be conducted or told to be sent right down this axon. Okay. The next thing that you need to be aware of is this stuff called myelin, or a myelin sheath. And so let me grab another color here. You're going to have these proteins that this cell, basically it is a cell, that wraps around this axon. So it's going to wrap around this myelin sheath. Now how does this thing work? Well, let me draw a picture right up over here. Here, if we were looking at the end, so here's my axon, and I'm just going to turn it up and we're looking right on the end of the axon. If you were to cut right through it and look on the end, what you would see with this myelin sheath is it wraps around that axon, insulating it, kind of like how a insulation, that plastic stuff on the outside of a wire, insulates it. So this is going to be a myelin sheath. Now, if this was a peripheral nervous system neuron, this would be a Schwann cell. Schwann cell would cause, or would be that cell that would form that myelin sheath. Now, in between the two the spots here between these myelin sheaths is a special thing called the node of Ranvier. Find a nice pencil here, a red pen. We'll use the red one. And when we talk about action potential, that's when this is going to be important, but it's involved with the conduction process of the neuron. Now, you can kind of divide up this neuron into some pretty broad-looking categories, and I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Let me grab another color here. I'm going to grab a light blue. Maybe that'll show up pretty good, and we can divide this thing up. So for this particular neuron, this area right here, this is the signal reception area. There's a direction to a neuron. This is the signal reception area. Okay, and we'll change to even another color still. And then the next area, we have what's called signal integration. We've got to figure out the cell body, and you have to hit certain requirements within the cell, and it has to do with membrane potentials and things along those lines that the major details we don't get into in a high school anatomy class. But this area right here where this axon hillock is, this area after the reception is going to be your signal integration. Signals recognized and then passed on. If it is to be passed on, if it reaches those particular things, it'll be passed on down onto the axon. This next piece down here is going to be your signal conduction phase. I got another color here I can pull. So basically this section is the signal conduction phase. It's the signal conduction. And it's exactly how it sounds. It's what's sending that signal down this axon so that it can have some effect when it gets down into the signal transmission section. And that's the last little bit down here. And I'm going to switch back to red for that. This is the signal transmission, or transmission section. And it's exactly what it sounds. The signal received, it's integrated in that sense. Did we hit the threshold to be able to send that signal on? If we do, we send that signal on down the conduction, and then here is where it's actually, that signal is transmitted. And in this case, this is a motor neuron, so it's going to be transmitted to that muscle, and that muscle then will contract if it goes through all the process that it is. You do need to remember the incoming signals that come in on this side are received, and what happens, and you need to look at action potential. There should be a video, or will be a video, or look in your textbook. That action potential, it changes the electrical gradient, the difference between the inside charge and the outside charge on that membrane actually changes that, which causes another change, a membrane potential change, to flow down to the cell body. That change in that membrane, if it's strong enough, hits all the way down here to that axon hillock. It has to be strong enough. And once that happens, once all of the dendrites or enough reach the threshold of that signal to transfer the information to the axon hillock, it will fire off this axon hillock, and we will get that membrane potential, that action potential. In other words, the charges will change all the way down here, and it will send that signal right down this axon until you get neurotransmitter released down here at the back end. You need to be sure that you understand that it is neurotransmitters that go across a very small gap right down here at the very bottom. This is everything on a neuron that you're going to need to know. You definitely need to make sure that you still look at your book and read through your textbook. That's it.